All right. Well, we're live. We'd like to welcome you guys back to the Trampled Underfoot podcast show. Your hosts are Mark Lindsay and Eloy Escajedo. What's going on,
And
Mark?
most importantly, we're both live. So that's always a good plus.
Yeah,
That's a good thing. So I guess to address the elephant in the room, you were kind of feeling under the weather last week, right?
yeah. I
Yeah.
was I was feeling, and I'm still not completely. I don't know what in the world, but just off.
So it's going
Um,
to be a mellow show then, huh?
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, it should be a mellow show. So everybody just turn the lights down low. We'll pull up the microphones nice and close and speak in low, mellow tones and let everybody get nice and relaxed. Yeah, right. That's going to happen.
I did. As I was not feeling well, I did go and do a little bit of yard work
Mhm.
here and there, just to break from the and I have a forest, but I've been working my way little by little, trying to get it. But it's so much. But I'm taking one bit at a time, so that, like, they say the the journey of 1,000 miles starts with your first step or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I started that, and it's overwhelming if I step back
Yeah,
because it's still so much, but within the
I know.
space, yeah, within the space of what one, like, if I just say, just I'm gonna focus just here and everything else is non-existent, that helps. you know
You're a better man than I am because I'm in one of those situations where I walk outside and I'm like, oh, hell, where do I start? Then turn around and go back inside and nothing gets done now. So
oh,
you're a better man than I am.
no, that's what I've been doing for the past 4 years, Mark.
Yeah. And it just gets to where, oh, it's not going to get better by itself. I got to go out and do something.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, Robin noticed something. Eloy
yeah,
shaved. Yeah, he was just saying he was doing some landscaping. So
yeah. I decided actually, the reason I shaved was because I found the shaving kit.
that's where that went.
I actually did. It's funny because I've been doing a little bit of the upkeep that I need to do,
Uh-huh.
and literally, when I was like working in one part of inside the house, I discovered this box. What is this box? And I opened it. Oh, look! And it was like a birthday gift. Like, I had all sorts of stuff in there, and I was like, "Oh my goodness! It's like Christmas all over again." And so, as I said, I have to shave now. I mean, the kit involves all sorts of um thing. Actually, this was sent to me by a viewer and a friend.
Oh,
It's
sweet.
part of this company.
Ah, Harry's. Okay. Yeah. All right.
So it has all the trimmings and all the good stuff and this and that, and it comes in a little box like this.
Oh, nice.
you know
Nice.
and so I had
Yep.
the blade, but the blade
Hmm.
had run its course, so the intervals of me shaving go a little bit long, but that's not really the excuse. It's just I found it and I said, well, let's bust this puppy open.
Well, one of our viewers just identified himself.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Greg, I had been using it, but the box with the extra trimmings, I mean, I believe I don't think two people sent me Harry's. Like, so I have a mountain of stuff in the corners and this and that. And there's stuff in there that had a purpose at one point, like a designated use. And this was stuffed. I had the blade already in the bathroom, but my blade had started to run its course.
Mhm.
And so I do it in between and whatnot. But whatever. Let's not prolong this episode of of shaving with
But
Eli.
well, no, but you touched on something there, and that is you get something, and you really are you are excited about it. You're like, oh, this is cool. I mean, I've never had that. This is great. This is cool. All right. But then something happens, and you have to put it down, and somehow you never manage to get back to it.
That's right.
Do you find yourself, what is this? Pick it up and I go, oh, I remember that. That
You know
was
what
real
I'm
important to me to about a year ago when I wanted that.
Yeah, it happens all the time. I have so much stuff for
Mhm.
one person. It's really not a lot, but it is because with the stuff that there's also excess stuff that could be tossed. It's
I
been
don't.
a difficult thing doing that sort of thing, but I still am trying to find my dad's dog tag.
Mhm.
Um, I can't. I know I saved it somewhere. I don't know where because I have so many boxes of that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and I'm still trying to figure out where the dog tag because I wanted to photograph it and have it as put into my
Yeah.
folders of his ancestry,
Yeah.
and I can't for the life of me figure out where the heck the dog tag was. I guess let me mention this. So, um, do you still have, or let me ask you, do you still have your uniform from the army?
Yes, I do. I have my dress uniform, my Class A uniform, but all of my work uniforms, the camouflage BDU, we called them, battle dress uniform. All of that stuff is long ago worn out and really no longer used. I think Linda still has some of hers, but mine is all worn out. But having said that, I know in a box, I believe in storage, I know I still have some flight suits, which is a fire retardant Nomex coveralls, and a few things like that I know I won't fit anymore because my girth has increased and I know I just can't. I wouldn't be able to wedge this into it. It'd be like putting 10 pounds of something in a 5 pound bag, it just wouldn't work. But, but no, the normal day to day work utility uniforms, even after I got out of the army, I wore them till I wore them out because I mean they were good sturdy pants for working on the property or what have you when we lived down in Nevada. It Why mess up a good pair of pants when I had those?
But
And
your like the green.
yes, my dress uniform I still have hanging in the closet, and Linda has hers too.
So
So
in the 80s,
mhm,
when I was a little kid, in our closet, actually it was in my closet. We had two rooms. The house was two bed, one bath.
mhm,
Still is next door. And I have a big closet in my room. And in that closet, there was all sorts of my dad had the boots with the Cuban heels from back in the day, all sorts of stuff all the clothes because it was a huge walk-in closet. And as a kid back in the 80s, I would you know nose around looking for
sure.
cool things and whatnot. And I saw a bag with boots
Mhm,
with green pants, green, the top,
mhm,
a helmet. The helmet, it was all his army stuff. The helmet had the dried shape of an egg on the inside
mhm,
of it.
mhm.
That is etched in my and a rifle.
Oh
A
wow.
like you put in the
Mhm,
one, just a wooden frickin'. And next thing my dad knows, he's walking outside. I'm in the yard, and I'm little, and his clothes are big. I have the boots on, and I'm crawling as if I'm in the army. And my mom comes out, and my dad says, "Look, he's ruining my clothing. I've been saving it," and I'm like just dragging all across the yard with it. Um, and then he just put his hands up and he just walked back in, let me continue doing it.
Yeah.
But I remember that uniform. He he had the helmet,
Hmm.
the whole uniform, the dog tag,
Hmm.
and I don't know if they. I didn't. Oh, in a bag. Actually, it was in a big green bag,
Hmm.
like a big burlap
Hmm.
green bag. Um, and and plus the rifle.
Yeah.
And did they let you bring home rifles?
No. Um, it used to be, well, it still is, but it used to be they had a lot of military surplus, and they would even up to and including rifles that were not full automatic. Like when they got the M4 and the M16, they no longer sold those to civilians. But the older ones, like the M1s, the old Springfield um, 03A2s, and things like that, like Linda has one that her dad bought Army surplus. We have the receipt. He paid $17 for it in the early 50s. And you can still buy them from the government, but there's a real long waiting list and they are outrageously expensive now. And you got to go through background checks like crazy to in order to purchase one, but you still can. Um, but they're not the standard issue rifle now anymore. So no doubt that's what he got, was one of the surplus rifles.
I
But
wonder.
no, they no longer, and they never did let you take them home. They never did.
Right. Well, that's why I'm asking. Well, so when my dad went
Mhm.
in '62,
Yeah.
um, I don't know exactly that I can, but the paperwork exists
Mhm.
online actually, because it's part of like the events that occurred during that era.
Uh-huh.
But these U.S. Army uh, graduates, soldiers,
Hmm.
he was part of a all Cuban group, so they were all Cuban within the context of, you
Right.
know, the army at that time, and they were shipped out and used by other agencies,
Hmm.
um, in order to do things that they were supposed to do. That was
Right.
not necessarily um, like it wasn't. It was something like some sort of side
Yeah. It's-
scenario.
they call it a special operation.
So if they did that then, I'm
Hmm.
sure they do that now, and it's a common thing, right? I would assume. But anyways, I always thought to myself, because I don't know that I ever asked him, but but the, but he had all his gear.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the rifle was something like that, or if
Well, it was nothing that was issued to him, because that's one thing that the government was always 100% paranoid about, was weapons walking away. So it was nothing that was issued to him. He probably bought it. And they're still all over the place. You can go to rifle shops now and you can buy rifles that were at one time military issue, but they were sold up into, well, there were a lot of them up into the about the mid 60s, and then the stockpile started to dwindle down, because
yeah,
the new stuff was issued and what have you, and the old stuff was turned in, and the powers that be found themselves with all these in their hands with nothing to, what the heck are we going to do with all this stuff? So they just started selling them as surplus, because they were basically the same thing you could go down and buy at any rifle shop. They were not a special military weapon at all.
there's some blurry things, and the reason that I still have the question mark, I know that that's the main option, right? But the
Mhm.
reason is that there were people in the 60s and into the 70s and beyond. But in the 60s, there was a gentleman called Mitch Warbell,
Mhm.
and he was a mercenary for hire. He was an American, and he worked with agencies,
Mhm.
and they ran guns, and so
Mhm.
my dad was part, not necessarily attached to him, but that Warbell worked
Mhm.
with Cubans in order to. There was strange alliances for purposes that I'm not. I have a general idea, but the point is that they ended up in Central America. My dad did, and it was uh, during that time. The base that was actually CIA base um, was left abandoned. He was one of the few left behind to close it down, um, or left behind, until they managed to close it down before they brought them here. It was like
Mhm.
nobody else left, and it got to the point where there was no more food.
Mhm.
Um, like they were just basically on their own. I mean, this is all um, sort of clouded in the
Yeah.
details of who exactly. But I know my dad was there. I know my my cousin. All these people came to the U.S. in order to enroll into the army, in order to then go get trained and go back and fight and topple Fidel. So that was their whole objective. And
Mhm.
the certain details are blurry from that. But anyways, long
Yeah.
story short, I found all those items plus that rifle, and
Mhm.
I can't find currently where that dog tag would be, but I'm sure I place it somewhere. And eventually, if I clear up all the clutter, I mean, inside, outside, like I've got work to do. So
Yeah. Yeah.
hopefully, I can get all that properly organized.
Well, you should be able to order your dad's military records from the army, and
I've looked.
there may be dog tags there. Well, yeah, you can, but you can go to the Army Records repository. You go through the Army Records repository in St. Louis, Missouri, and you should be able to get a copy of his personnel file, and they'll send you a copy of whatever they got.
I
Now,
have his documents and his dog tag, like his number,
mhm,
and like sharpshooter, what he ranked on
right.
with it. Like I have all that stuff. I looked one time when we were talking about this,
Hmm.
where you can search it on the thing,
Hmm.
but he doesn't appear.
Okay, I was going to say that they did have a fire in, I want to say, the early 70s. Maybe it was the mid 70s. And I don't remember the exact letters, but every last name, if your last name was from here to here, these records were destroyed. So anything prior to the mid 70s. In fact, that's something. Let me look that up real quick here. Uh,
He was stationed in and he trained in South Carolina, and
okay,
he was for a spell in um not what's Kentucky, Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Fort Knox, Kentucky. Okay. Yes, it was 1973 at the National Personnel Records Center near St. Louis. And they estimate anywhere from 16 to 18 million official military personnel files were destroyed. And there are no duplicates. Uh, let's see, they say. Um, um, no, they don't say what area. So they were no, they don't say what areas, what names were affected, like from B through J or something like that. But they put out the word and they tried to get as many people as possible. If you have records from any of your, if you have records or records from your relatives, we need copies of these records. Please, send us a copy. And people
Interesting.
have. They've been able to,
Reconstruct.
yeah, reconstruct. What is it? They did 6.5 million files from that out of the 12 to 18 that were lost.
Yeah, because
So
I'd like to, like, I have no, so that part of my dad, like, I know the story in a broad sense, and I know key points in a broad sense that I've documented.
yeah,
But maybe I'm asking for too much, but and I have photos too. But the interconnected particular stories and the soldiers that were part of that and their intricate. Maybe I'm asking for too much because I'm so into doing research. So maybe I'm asking for like a biography of these things, um, and maybe that situation's a little bit out of reach. But I mean, I have plenty already. But it would be nice to stitch together
yeah.
certain things.
Well,
You know,
believe me when I say that there are things in his personnel records that you will not have seen, because these were records that were kept. He probably never saw them either. So, just orders that came down, sending him from one place to another that he never saw. All he knew is we're going from here to here. Um, any awards that he was never given or notified that he was qualified for. And things like that happen, believe me. Any investigations, anything like that. But it says here that 80% of Army records from personnel that were discharged from November 1st, 1912 to January 1st, 1960, 80% of those records were gone.
but that he doesn't fall in that then.
75% of personnel discharged from September 25th, 1947 through January 1st, 1964, 75% of those are gone.
He could fall into he would fall into that range.
Okay.
So 75%.
Yeah. So
That's a lot.
it's possible they're gone, but
But do, like, let's say you're in Fort Knox, Kentucky as a
mhm,
soldier.
mhm,
All your paperwork
mhm,
from your stay and training in that scenario, in that place, but
mhm.
that base, do does all of it get boxed and sent to a deposit, a huge bank, a
No,
holding, or does it stay in the actual building?
some of it goes with you to your next station. So if you go from Fort Knox, let's say, to Fort Eustis, Virginia, you will take some of it with you. The rest of it will go to, they call it DA, Department of the Army in Washington. And when you get out of the Army, all of the records that they have gets all collated into one big folder, and that gets sent to the records repository in St. Louis.
Okay, so it ends up in that one place, and that's how come.
Right. Right.
Unfortunately, they didn't digitize until
Well,
digit digitize. I can't say it. Anyways, until digital stuff came along.
right.
Can you
So
say it?
digitization.
See, I should have added the I. See, I
Yeah.
was trying to go
See,
without the I.
now here you go. Linda's got the lingo down. That's the standard form 180, SF 180. Request pertaining to military records is used to request information from military records. I used to work personnel records was I was in the Guard, but only Nevada National Guard records. Yeah. So you can go online and fill out an SF 180 requesting everything. Because it's your deceased father, you may have to attach a redacted copy of the death certificate and send that in. And then when they get to you, because believe me, they got a bunch of requests, they'll send you what they got. Okay, she says they were just starting to digitize when she retired in 2009.
Oh,
So yeah,
because there's a lot of information on so many soldiers, so much
mm-hmm.
that would be well, just for the history of
Yeah.
and personal history and the greater history. to have it, you know.
Well, not only that, but you may discover quite a bit about your father that you never even knew, because right now about all you know is what he told you and what you've seen in the documentation you have in your possession.
That's all. Yeah.
But I mean, they have a record of everything he did, every order he was given on paper, that is, paper type orders for movement or what have you, any
Yeah.
operations he participated in, all of that stuff.
Would I'm assuming that anything to do with CIA
It depends
would
on if it was classified or not, or if it has been declassified.
I have gotten my hands on some declassified stuff that's
Yeah.
actually publicly now available, and I've been able to hunt down uh, certain things. But
Mm-hmm.
um, during his military time,
Right.
to know those specific details would be useful, you know,
Mm-hmm.
for me. But yeah, according to what he didn't speak an incredible amount of it, but what he did, I I I was able to take a mental snapshot of. But it would, you know, now looking back, it would have been good to have
Well,
more information.
you're under. I'm trying to trying to remember the word for it. It's an agreement. You're not going to talk about it. It's oh, I can't
Confidential
remember.
agreement.
Yeah, there's a confidentiality agreement. Yes, in that you are not allowed to talk about certain things. But it's been my experience that most veterans who go through, even who go through combat and weren't a part of anything classified, just don't want to talk about it, mainly because they don't want to relive it themselves. NDA, there it is, non disclosure agreement. I couldn't remember what it was called. Um, and yeah, basically, what they're saying is that if you disclose anything about something that was classified, you go to prison. And that's all there is to it.
Unless you're unless you're I was gonna say bring somebody. I'm not gonna do it. Some of our modern politicians, I'm
Yeah.
gonna leave them.
Well,
Unless you have some.
even then, it's up to certain people to prosecute. But believe
Yeah.
me, um, okay, here she goes. You've got my mind running on military time again. Yeah, that's what happens when you spend 22 years in the military. Let's see here. Greg says, I've got the service records of my grandfather and some of his brothers from World War One. Yeah, and I bet you learned some things about your grandfather that you never knew. I mean, I read my dad's, just his discharge papers, and found out a few things about him that I never knew. Some of the awards he was given and things like that. It's wow.
He
So,
left me. My dad left me with slightly an impression, or I don't know if I'm filling in the blanks. But and there's not an awful lot. So there were two. It's a weird time in history because it was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
mhm,
Um, Everybody was on pins and needles about
yeah.
whether there's going to be a future or not because of the situation. Um, and there were two groups. There were, or at least as far as I know, there were two groups. One were the guys that came over from Cuba and immediately prepared for combat and were dispatched on the
Mhm,
island. Um, air air support was not given them by Kennedy,
mhm,
and they all ended up and they were dropped. They were dropped in the swamp, actually right in the backyard of where my father was born.
mhm,
Um, and It's a huge swamp-like area. They
mhm,
were dropped there, and the idea was there were going to be drops to take cover and, you know, clandestine like,
mhm,
and start to overtake cities and towns and such, and then keep going and going and going. But they were dropped in this muddy, mucky area, and they had trouble and the gear and they dropped everything. I mean, they
mhm,
were out and going for, and they were virtually killed and or caught,
mhm,
and they were languishing in prison. Eventually, a deal was made, and they were brought back. That was the one group. My dad was in the second group, he had come here in '62, and within a couple of months, I have the registration and all that. Within a couple of months, he went to Coral Gables, um, and in Aurora Street, signed up for the army, and then they sent them to get trained to do an. I guess the idea was, and I don't know this for sure. The idea was to prepare them for a second invasion, either covertly, not seeming to be part of the United States, some weird thing like that where the CIA took
Yeah.
control of it, or it was on the up and up, but they weren't used and they remained scattered in Central America and such before coming. Like something was going on there where there was two different. So there was the initial people, and then there was the group that my dad
Hmm.
uh, he trained because he graduated in '63,
Hmm.
and then he was shipped out to do what he was going to do, but that never came to fruition. And so after that, it all whittled down as far as the confrontation,
Hmm.
leaving all these Cubans very unsatisfied because their whole purpose was for them to, you know, go and attack and liberate the country, um, with the assistance of the United States. Like, that was
Yeah.
their idea. But due to the strategizing and complication of nuclear war,
Yeah.
um, it was all nullified, and so all these dissatisfied Cubans in Miami began to do grouping up, and it just snowballed from there. So there's all this blurriness attached to those years in
Yeah.
terms of so.
Well, I don't think people realize if you've not really looked into the, um, oh my God, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I don't think people realize how close we actually came to launching. I mean, it was close. There were aircraft in the sky ready to go.
Yeah.
There were missiles armed, ready to be fired.
Yeah.
And the only thing that prevented it at basically, just a few seconds before launch was Khrushchev over in the Soviet Union. He backed down. And it was diplomacy back and forth between the US and the Soviet Union that made a lot of the plans for Cuba go away. But it was that threat of nuclear war. And I mean, we were that close. We were very close. All it would have been one ship to launch a missile or fire a deck gun at another ship, or one aircraft to shoot at another one, and it would have been World War III right there. We were
Yeah.
that close.
Well, part of the deal that they finally struck, being that close to like a very not nice unfolding of things, was that because what happened during that, a lot of things happened during that era, so it's kind of like there's a lot, but
Yeah.
Castro was snubbed by the United States early on. He was slightly appreciated in certain circles, but Castro wanted to make certain deals that the United States was not willing to make in
Mhm.
terms of negotiation with like sugar and whatnot. And the United States used their pressure and restricted sugar advancement for the Cubans. And Castro basically it became a back and a tit for tat.
Mhm.
And but at the same time, Castro had confiscated businesses, um, just for the general American public, um, notwithstanding actual Cubans that lost their businesses and
Mhm.
such. But there was truckloads of Americans
Mhm.
integrated into Cuban society, um, that owned businesses to the point of like big corporations,
Yeah.
and they all were confiscated.
Yeah.
Huge companies, like all the name brands of the time that, and some of them that are still around today, lost a fortune because Castro basically took those companies.
Mhm.
And not only were Cubans sore, but so were Americans, um, because they lost their butt. And then there was the human aspect of it too. So
Yeah.
pretty much the Americans were on par with at least the exile Cuban community in having that come down. But Castro, as part of the deal, inserted that, and the U.S. will never invade Cuba again, nor intervene ever again. And so that was part of the deal within that. And due to all these things, certain laws were enacted that allowed Cubans special attention when it comes to immigration and a bunch of things that, like Puerto Ricans, which is a protectorate,
Mhm.
have enjoyed since the early 1900s. Cubans enjoyed without having the benefit of a free country due to the communism and stuff. So it was a complicated thing,
Yeah.
but people have forgotten and people never knew, especially a lot of people in Miami that may be of Latin or Hispanic origin that aren't Cuban, um, blend everything together and see. If you don't go through it, you don't feel it as deep as,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying, as the people
Or
that,
and
if you don't lose your property and your butt and your family, then you don't necessarily feel it as as
or
close
or
as the people
or
that,
you're even educated as to what happened or how it happened
right.
or
Yeah.
what came about, because
Yeah.
I was taught very little about it in school. Most of what I learned about it, I learned from my dad, who was in the Navy at the time. And they were on alert. They were on a ship headed for Panama Canal. He knew that he was going to war. And finally, they got orders to turn around and went back to Guam. And but they were they were on their way,
Hmm.
you know. And
This world is smaller
Mhm.
now. I don't want to deviate from it, or I guess it doesn't matter either way. Either way, but I just want to say, at least this is my impression. This world is. I know there's billions of people on Earth,
Mhm.
but this world is smaller in certain regards
Mhm.
than we might. It's a tall order to say, but so for instance, you and I can find a common link to that event
Mhm.
through our parents and whatever, and
Yeah,
this and that. You know what I'm saying? So certain things,
I
it's
do.
weird how certain things, I guess like that 6 degrees or 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon type thing.
Well, you would be amazed at some of the things we put down to coincidence, but it does come down to, as you say, the world being smaller than you think it is. For instance, I'll give you an example. My dad was stationed on Guam. I just mentioned that in the Navy, and it had been done once before, but he was in a CB battalion, construction battalion, and they had access to all kinds of heavy equipment and what have you. Well, long before my dad ever got there, uh, a two-man pocket submarine, Japanese two-man pocket sub, had washed ashore during a storm. And the base commander decided this would be cool in front of the headquarters building. So they built some concrete stanchions and they put this little Japanese pocket sub, painted it all up and everything, and put it up in front of the headquarters building there on the base. And long before my dad got there, uh, some CBs got drunk one night and got some heavy equipment, picked that sucker up, and sunk it in the swimming pool at the officers' club.
Yeah.
Well, they fished it out of there, put it down on the stand again, and welded off the bolts inside so that it couldn't be unbolted and lifted up anymore. Well, my dad and his buddies decided, and this was early 60s, uh, had a little bit to drink. They went in there with welding torches and cut those nuts off and did it again. Lifted it up and sunk it in the officer's swimming pool. Now, I was telling that story in a little beer bar in Fernley, Nevada, when I was working for a company. I worked on slot machines in bars and convenience stores and gas stations and what have you. And I'm telling that story to a guy sitting next to me. And from down the far end of the bar, I hear a voice say, "Damn it, that story is 100% true. I was there when it happened." And I looked down the end of the bar, and it's this older guy sitting there. And I said, "You were on Guam?" He said, he was on a destroyer escort that had come in, they reprovisioned, did something, and they had sailed. When word came out that happened, when they discovered that submarine, their entire damn fleet had to turn around and go back to Guam until they found out who done it. So that son of your father cost me 3 extra days at sea, and yada, 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 going on and on and on, talking about it and everything else. So you never know where stories about events that you or a relative
Connect.
took part in, you never know when you're going to bump into somebody that was either there or has peripheral knowledge of it.
It's
You know?
incredible.
Yeah.
It really, there's a lot of things like that that make you at least think,
Mm-hmm.
wow, I guess that's where the saying comes. Like Greg was saying, it's a small world after. I guess that's where that saying comes, because people have noticed in the past that, wow, here's a connection, and yet who would have thunk it, as
Yeah.
far as, yeah.
Yeah. It is strange in that. Well, we had a discussion along similar lines a few weeks back. I mean, now you working in the Everglades, you were in a high tourist area, and people were taking pictures with you all the time.
Yeah.
And that was just a thing. But the question came up, um, did you ever wonder how many pictures of you in the background, not you with somebody having a selfie taken or something like that, but you went to some place, you went to Disney World, for example, and you were just standing next to a building, and unbeknownst to you, a few steps away, there's a family getting their portrait taken in front of that building.
Yeah.
How many pictures of you in the background are there hanging in people's living rooms throughout the world?
Yeah. As an extra in their main theme.
Yeah. It's just kind of one of those weird little thoughts that come in and go out, and it's just like, damn, I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
I really don't know.
saying that now, so there's this really old picture. My grandparents had a various boxes of photographs from the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them were from Spain proper.
Mm-hmm.
Pictures of, and I've shared some on my page and this and that, as the good ones I hold on to, because should I share this as if it were, but it is, because it's something personal and special. And in one of the pictures, there's a lady standing up, and sure enough, I know she's my great grand aunt,
Mm-hmm.
my grandfather's sister, Balbina. Her name was Balbina. She's standing there in that 1920s, 1930s dress.
Mm-hmm.
Just a classic. And if I look at her, and I'm like, oh, that's my family. Absolute. Like it's like, I look at, it's like, whenever I look at, there's a certain look. Like my grandfather had a huge, so the Escajado, we have huge,
Yeah.
I don't have that.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I always joke with my cousin in Spain. I say, and I'm going to have an operation. You know how people usually reduce their nose? No, I want to increase mine so I can approach the
The
look of the
escalator.
occasion. Yeah, 'cause huge noses. But Mark, noses that, and the ears are you, and I didn't get that either. But the ears
Mhm.
go. There's a certain look
Mhm.
that's marked, like and I look at that photo. Sitting next to her is another young lady in the 1930s at that time. And in her letter, or in the post, she says, and oh, and by the way, like she's mailing this off, to Cuba. And in the letter, she's saying, oh, and by the way, the young lady sitting next to me is the daughter of our aunt, and this is her what was it? Youngest, and this is her youngest daughter, Jacinta, sitting down. And for the life of me, I spent years thinking, who's this extra woman there? Who is she? Who is she? I finally figured it out. It's been a couple of years, but I finally figured it out by doing the search on my tree and gathering certificates and whatnot. And she happens to be like she's a cousin of mine, 3 generations removed. She would land as a first cousin 3 generations removed. In other words, she sits directly and she's sitting there. And so you discover through these items someone that seemed unknowable as
Mhm.
no, but that's a rare. In most
It
cases, you
is.
have a plethora of faces, and it's impossible to. So we are the extras. Imagine how many people of the like that
Oh
are in
yeah.
other people's pictures, and because there's no wording attached to the photo, it's just lost to history.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to get that information while people are still around, because I've got tons of photographs. Those big, huge 17-gallon Rubbermaid totes. I've got 3 of them over here full of pictures, and half of the people in these pictures, I don't know who they are. I don't even know which side of the family they're on. Now, a few people I can place, but others, I have no idea who they are.
It's unfortunate.
And I've got, well, some of them may be friends, some of them may be relatives, but I have no clue. Um, Thankfully, I had my father alive long enough to kind of let me know who some of these people are, and I can recognize some faces. And I've got copious notes taken, believe me. And I've got photos imported and no, that I've scanned, and names attached to those photos so that I can place them in approximate ages, but not everybody. I mean, there are just too many pictures, and I don't know that I will ever be done.
It's a difficult thing because I don't know the wherewithal a person has at a given moment. So there's people. So just by habit, or not by
Mhm.
habit, practicality.
Mhm.
If you take a pic, like let's say you're back in 1940 something, and you have your picture developed and whatnot, and you're going to send it off to your cousins or aunts across the country or wherever the heck, and in the back you say, oh, and this is Tim and his sister, and I just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas, and so on and so forth. Now you've attached something on the back of that even though it's not descriptive to the point of exhaustion where it's like this is Tim, third twice removed cousin of such and such. It's
Right.
not like a genealogy, but it's enough to sort of steer the ship 20, 30, 40, 50 years out. But people don't have the foresight necessarily. A lot of people did, but in
Mhm.
general people just take pictures and toss them in a box because that's what you do, and it's a memory for your lifetime. But now we know that
Well,
things are heirlooms and family legacies and things like
but
that.
now I I don't know. I hope I'm wrong in this, but unfortunately, I don't think I am. Because, for instance, when was the last time you took a roll of film down and got it developed? It's
It
been a
has to be
while.
15, 20 years, maybe 20
Yeah.
years more.
So my question is, in 1,000 years from now, is history basically going to end? Because, and what I mean by that is, we have reached a digital age. and everybody is doing everything digitally. Well, that only works so long as there's a power plant running something.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do when the lights go out? I mean, here and now,
Yeah.
you and I, we go nuts because we don't have the internet anymore. You know, so, but 500 or 1,000 years from now, are archaeologists, future archaeologists, going to get back and look back at us and say, oh, that's the Dark Ages? Because we don't know anything about what they did, because everything was digital and those formats are now so redundant, we can't fill in the blanks.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things. I was going to mention two things, but that's an interesting thing. Um, I was going to mention something else that was curious that I had run into, but on that. Um, so that's a very interesting thing. So I guess there's too much for me.
It's a lot to unpack. Yeah,
No, there's too many thoughts that came out from that. For me to, I'm trying to like with the horse. Whoa, whoa.
Mhm.
So an equivalent to what you just said back in time
Mhm.
is an event that occurred back in like 1200 BC or so, during the Bronze Age,
Mhm.
where in at the time across the Mediterranean, um, civilization was like rocking in terms of
Mhm.
like they were building stuff and like they're honest to goodness cities, and they had trade and they trade in all sorts of stuff and this and that. But then and they had writing and all this and,
Mhm.
that. And like there was like ledgers and in their ancient ways, but they had like, okay, 10 horses for such and such, and we got 5 bales of horse manure. I don't know what the heck. So they had documentation in all these things. And then something occurred called the Bronze Age
Bondage
collapse.
collapse. Yeah.
And all those societies, the Greeks, all of them, except for Egypt, for some reason. Well, Egypt was very powerful, and I guess they were able to push them back. Because I'm sorry, the Bronze Age collapse was that they thought that it was people coming in and raiding all the societies, and just
Mhm.
and due to that, society collapsed. They lost their writing. They lost. Um, it became a dark. The first, they call it the first Dark Ages.
Mhm.
So languages that existed before that event no longer. So the history of those people have become for us something that you read in a book. Well, and then again, you're talking about thousands and thousands of years, so it's like at that point.
Yeah.
But it's become things we read in a book, and we're missing a lot of focal detail, and so if so, even if it was concrete, like on tablets and whatnot, or parchments and whatnot, it still got lost. So imagine something that's digital, like you're saying.
Mhm.
All you need to do is flip the switch off.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
thought.
Electromagnetic pulse would wipe any kind of data, be that on some big server, or on the thumb drive that you happen to have in your sitting right here on your desk. All that data just wiped out and erased. I mean, and it's not as far fetched as you might think, but um, and then again, technology could just leave all of this behind. I mean, there's already talk about AI and this, that, and the other, but let's not forget that we all bought CD players. Then we bought DVD players. Yes, they would still play a CD, so we were okay there. We didn't have to buy everything again because we'd already gone through that route with vinyl, then cassette, then CD. We can still play our CDs in DVD players, but now everything has gone MP3, where it's a digital download. You don't even have to buy the whole album. You just download the songs that you want.
Yeah.
Well, when technology, and yeah, and okay, we also had VHS tapes. You can't buy a VCR today. They stopped making them. The last VCR was made in 2013, so 10 years ago. This year, you can't buy a new VCR. So the format becomes redundant and nothing will read it. So AI is making huge steps, and I'm wondering what's going to be the next format that's going to make what we're doing now redundant. And it doesn't have to be a catastrophe. It doesn't have to be any kind of a war or any dystopian society. Just that technology will make so many leaps. Everything we're doing right now is in a format that we can't read anymore. So
Yeah.
if everything on your smartphone right now is worth what's on this video cassette, what good is it? You know? So that's what I was getting at as far as dark ages are concerned. With us putting everything
Digital.
into a digital format and putting nothing to paper that can at least be archived. You know, I may not know who all these people are in all these photos, but I have a record of the time that they were taken. I may not know if it was 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s, but we have a record of that progression and we can figure it out. But right around somewhere around 2004, 2005, that stopped. You know,
Yeah.
we know. I mean, I was fortunate enough to get my father to sit down and write his story. I begged him to do it, and I'm glad he did. I figured it would be a page and a half, maybe 2 pages. He wrote 35 pages of his entire story from his birth up to his diagnosis with cancer. And the last line is, "We'll see where this goes." And a year and a half later, he passed away.
Yeah.
So I had to add the epitaph to that. But at least there is a record when he was born, where he was born, who his mother and father were, as many ancestors as he personally could remember, his descendants, all of that stuff. So, you know, all of my kids have a copy of it. There's copies here, and one is going to the genealogy museum here to be included in our family folder there. So
Yeah.
it's, I
Yeah.
mean, it's wild to think about the fact that everything we have, everything we are, may be lost just a few years down the road when technology comes up with the newest thing.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Although we do see within that the transfer, like, so, I mean, well, we know this, but just to mention it because it's part of the conversation, or I think we do well to mention that, even though it's an obvious thing.
Mhm.
Movies, as an example, like there's other examples, but movies that were meant to be played in the movie theater back in the early 30s, 40s, have been progressively updated, or at least the original reels may or may not be conserved. In
Mhm.
some cases, like Nosferatu, let's say,
Mhm.
um, that's it was a lot of it is missing, but it was transferred, so they have the transfer of the original and blah 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 blah. So there's a lot of that kind of thing where
Yes.
as technology advances, you get like this older format being put into that newer one, and so we have a copy of a copy of a copy, let's say.
Right. And there's a lot of that. They did the same thing with the movie Metropolis. That has been recaptured, remastered, and redigitized. But for every film that has happened to, there are 8, 10, 12 others that haven't, just because
Yeah.
there's so many. I mean, when you think of the thousands of motion pictures that came out from, well, from the invention of motion picture technology up to just yesterday, when you think of the thousands of films that have been made, the hundreds of thousands of films, there are just too many to keep all of them. and some
Yeah.
of them have been lost. There are no copies left. Some were destroyed by fire or flood or storm or something like that, and others just degraded. The plastic degraded so much. There is an old color Laurel and Hardy film. They were always short. They were 15 to 20 minutes long. They weren't, feature film. But all that's left, because the original film degraded so bad, all that's left is maybe about a minute and a half long snippet. The rest of it just disintegrated and dissolved.
Yeah.
And it was the only known Laurel and Hardy short in color, shot in color. The rest of them were all done in black and white. And so there were a lot of films that have been lost due to that reason. But there are film preservation societies that are working to take care of that, working to fix that. But that doesn't help the small family. That doesn't help your 8mm movies.
Yeah.
That doesn't help my well, I don't have any 8mm movies anymore. I don't even know what happened. I think they burned in my parents' garage when it caught fire, but I'm not certain. I mean, there is so much information we are losing today because our attention is focused somewhere else. And that may be good, that may be bad, but all of it, I don't think all of it is a good thing.
Well, it's also susceptible, like what you're saying, to the changing times and things like something being out, a format being outdated, disinterest in some cultural popular film, or even in families personal information that's just left for the next set of, hopefully, I mean, hopefully is relative, because, but if they find value in preserving those things at some point in the chain, people just hold on to memories in the physical form of, like, photographs and letters and so on. And then the next generation inherits it, and until somebody sits down and collates it to some degree, and then a few generations down the line, somebody says, "Oh, look, they collated that. Let's review it." And then when you review it, you find extra information, and so it's an
Right.
ongoing sort of, it's not. It's kind of a little bit of a dirty process, because a
It
lot
is.
of people, not that they don't care, but maybe, like you said, they're on their
They're
life
otherwise
journey.
occupied. Yeah.
Right. And so it takes a special interest in a
Right.
person to do, a certain task, like that, like collating
Well,
information.
you mentioned last week that film of the family riding along in the car behind the streetcar that had a camera on it. And
Yeah.
it's just the family with their driver in the car.
Yeah.
And that one genealogist investigator, he got the license number of that car and he started an investigation, and he did a video on who that family was, who the
Hmm.
driver was. He named the names of the kids. He found their house. He found all kinds of information about these people.
Yeah.
But he did that, what, 2 years ago?
Hmm.
So 2021, and that footage was shot when? It took somebody that many years to go, yeah, who was that? Well, how
Yeah.
many other stories are that way that just nobody has an interest in tracking down?
Well,
And
that's true.
I
Well,
mean,
go
it,
ahead.
it wasn't a man of any consequence,
No,
but
I think he was a
but
professional.
well, he was a professional, but it's not like he was you
Babe
know,
Ruth or something.
yeah, he wasn't the president of El Salvador or anything like that. He was a businessman. He was a prominent businessman, but he wasn't a household name.
Mm.
But even though he wasn't a household name, he was a person who had a family. That family had a story, and it's quite possible that now that story and that film is in the hands of a descendant of
Mhm.
someone in that film.
Or
I mean,
someone adjacent to that family.
how freaked out would you be to find that somebody had filmed an event in Cuba where your dad was a little kid, a 6-year-old kid running around in that film, and you had no idea that your dad didn't know it existed. It just turns out that, hey, there's video of,
Discovered.
yeah, your dad and his parents, and they were all just a day on the beach or whatever. I don't know. I'm just coming up with scenarios off the top of my head. But you know, let's see here. Greg says they will come up with a new technology that will take over, similar to digitizing print and film records now. Yeah. The cloud is the new technology of today. No need for a physical medium. I agree with that, so long as it's working, so long as something else doesn't replace it and it go away. I mean, Greg, I don't know if you remember the GeoCities web pages everybody used to have. Everybody used to have a GeoCities web page that told all about themselves. That was the big thing when the internet was new, to have one of those. They're gone.
Let me address a little bit of this this things changing format and things being lost in a certain way that I'd like to see what what your thoughts are. Um, which is it's the same. I'm reiterating slightly, but I'm adding some things just for for the sake
Mhm.
of doing so. So we're talking films, we're talking photographs. We, we haven't touched on music, but it goes without saying.
Mhm.
Well, actually, have we? We did. We talked about CDs and so on.
Yeah.
You did, and house format. So we have all this information, which is basically it's information. At a certain level, it's just information,
Right.
but it's also the lives of people.
Mhm.
It's personal. It gives meaning
Mhm.
for whatever it's worth. Um, Sentimental in many cases. Sometimes it informs it informs at the level of a historical scenario, event, or
Mhm.
whatever, of all these things. If we go back, as far back as we can figure, and thinking of losing things across time due to changes, be it destruction or other factors, like we have been talking about. If you think of something like the pyramids,
Right.
and when you walk in, hieroglyphs, these huge, powerful, huge structures in and graphed into them are words. I mean,
Sure.
in picture form, hieroglyphic, telling a story of the people of the time, mostly the royalty of the time, and the events, the wars, and so on and so forth, and their religious things. It's carved into their history is carved into their statues, their buildings,
Mhm.
the actual hieroglyphs in the thing. And they're not the only ones. You have Babylon.
Mhm.
Um, you know, actually, I wrote Cedars of Lebanon because I've been looking at the Phoenicians for. I've been studying the Phoenicians slightly, very
Mhm.
surface slightly, and so I added that. But the Phoenicians and their buildings, um, and these are things that are so powerful and powerful. I said it again. These are things that
Imposing.
are imposing and like rock or
Mhm.
it's like a solid material that has
Mhm.
lasted through the ages.
Yeah.
Um, and then you have things that are a little bit like vellum and parchments and such, or mud bricks, and then you have pottery, and all these things are transferring information forward. But if we come to us from the moment of photographs as an example, now we have a an item. And by the way, the photographs in many cases were done on plates. So
Yes.
So there are like something tangible, but they can fade, they can damage.
Sure. Some of the glass plates can get shattered. I mean, or damaged
Yeah.
in other ways. Yeah.
So we have things that are now recording history,
Mhm.
but if you think of the strength of like, I keep saying these things because I'm associating it with the longevity of like marble, let's say,
Mhm.
and so I'm using strength and this and that. But you get the point, right?
Yeah, it's
It's
because it's the truth. Yeah.
yeah, it's like a material that, so if you carve something into it, yes, it can fade through time slightly, maybe, but
Sure.
it's so, when you compare to something fragile like
Paper.
exactly. So, but now we're going into the cloud thing that Greg was talking about, where it's all digital. And again, what if some sort of electric pulse or whatever
Hmm.
were to happen, if you don't have the so okay, so just to wrap this up, a couple of years ago I told you, just like what Greg was saying, you know what, and I had said back then, we don't need all the libraries and all this and that. I have since changed my mind, and I have mentioned it to you before,
Hmm.
because of these conversations.
Yeah.
Even though it's convenient, it's so convenient,
Hmm.
right? We can put it all up on the, but we don't know if it's going to be there or
Right.
accessible and so on. If you have a book, it could get burned.
Hmm.
But if you have a book and there's, let's say, 1,000 copies
Right.
scattered across libraries across the world, so
Yes.
just to update that thing that I have mentioned before, physical copies of things are pretty, even though they take up space. I don't know. I think we should have them.
Well, not only that, but the multitude of them. I think we may have done an episode with this as one of the topics, talking about libraries, how they used to be where everybody went to get information. They are morphed into more or less museum collections of information because there are still books being published every day, fiction and nonfiction. A lot of people read them digitally, but a lot of people still go buy that paper because they want that physical, tangible thing in their hand that isn't dependent on a battery.
Yeah.
I know I'm married to one of them, but they the libraries are slowly morphing into repositories of the information that we have of this age. Now, they can't store everything, but the sheer number of libraries around the world, I think, are one of the safeguards of what's going on today. No, they're not going to be keeping the pictures that I post on Facebook or what I had for lunch today, but they are keeping the record of the time, because the books that come out about cleaning up the plastic in the ocean, they're being stored there. The books that come out about endangered species and the efforts to, keep them alive, keep them from going extinct, rather, and various other, just pick a topic. Somebody is writing a book about it today,
Yeah.
and there are copies in a
Circulate.
multitude of libraries worldwide.
Yeah.
So I think that's one saving grace. But I think
Yeah.
what's gonna go missing, I mean, uh, Greg and Jim both had good points here. Greg says TikTok will be the keeper of anything important to society now. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But then Jim rebutted with, until the failure of the internet, that is. And I think that's just as valid a point as Greg's, because if that infrastructure is damaged or dies, or something else replaces it, then it doesn't matter what's on TikTok, just like it doesn't matter what was on MySpace 20 years ago, because everything that was on MySpace 20 years ago is gone.
Yeah.
So, it's um it's one of those things. And if we don't keep it, if we don't keep a physical record of it, we've just lost it. It's gone. How many times have we had a hard drive crash and lost everything, and we moan and complain about it?
Yeah.
Well,
Did you know?
that's
I
that's
don't know if you've read this. DNA can store actual content. Like actual DNA can contain like a storage. They like movies. DNA. I well, you can search for it. I'll search for it later. But they have a bunch of. They've managed to within DNA. Like I don't know the detail, but this has made me think about DNA. I don't know the specifics of it, but they have vials. They say it's very expensive.
Mhm.
Um, they have the movie of to the moon and back, or to the where the bullet hits the eye. They made like I don't know how many millions of copies, and they fit it into a strand of DNA.
Mhm.
The actual movie where you can
Yeah.
actually pull the information and
Mhm.
data as if it were a hard drive.
Yeah.
The details of that and how all that works and this and that, I've not looked, but I ran across that, and they weren't being silly
Mhm.
dillies or anything. They were on. To me, it sounds so fantastical.
Mhm.
It's worth looking into. I just haven't had time to sit through it. I don't know. Have you heard of that?
I've not heard of that, but I have heard about the amount. uh, uh, There comes a point where numbers are meaningless. They just get so big and so powerful that they become meaningless. And there's been a lot of talk about here lately how the human genome, they've figured out that all humans, every human walking the face of the earth, is 99.1% identical. The DNA is 99.1% identical. But if you turn that around and you run the numbers, that still means that in each of those little bits of information within the DNA, that was over, I think they said 3 billion individual differences. So it's still a gigantic number that just you can't wrap your head around.
Yeah, it's 99.9% the same,
Oh, 99.9, not 99.1. Okay. All right.
and the differences are massive differences.
Oh, huge. Yes.
But but one what the differences mean. Um, so the problem with
Yeah.
so yes, I've had what the problem is with the differences is that one must be careful. Well,
Well,
go ahead. What were you
my
gonna say?
my point in all of that was that okay, 99.9. So zero point zero 0.01, let's say it's 300 billion. Well, 0.01% of 300 billion is still 30 million. No, 300 million. So yes, it's 0.1%, but it's still a number so huge that it's basically that number is meaningless by the time you get to that. So that's all I
Yeah.
was getting at. With the numbers were so
Well,
tremendous and so gigantic, it's just like, what the hell?
that could go into a different thing, and it's clear.
Mhm.
That could go into other things, but I'll leave
Sure.
that because that's a whole world.
Well,
So
it,
that's a whole world that leads into other things because people. So I'll just be frank. People that understanding,
mhm.
which is true, we're 99.9% the same, all human
Okay.
beings. But as you know, we have a standard of understanding, um, at least in recent history across
Mhm.
time, um, where something to the effect of there's different races that exist. So you have your white
Yeah,
race,
sure.
you have your um, African or black race, you have your Asian or slash, and these are conventions that are, and so what a lot of people do looking for, and I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that these are the thoughts that prop up because I've seen this used where people are trying to defend something it's indefensible at this stage of the
Okay.
game, where they'll use that and they say, well, you know what, and they've used it on me because I've done quite a few videos explaining, well, look, this is the information and stuff and what it means, and I've had quite a few people say, yeah, well, you know what, there's still this, okay, so you're hanging on to the 1% and stuff. And so I've had interactions with people
Well,
that prefer to not indulge in the concept that that humans
I,
are, so that's where it gets slightly
I
blurry, but
understand that.
that's not this topic, but yeah.
I understand that. My whole point about using that, I could just as easily have said M&Ms, okay?
Yeah,
They
yeah,
make so many trillion M&Ms per week that if you eliminated 0.1%, well, 0.1% of a trillion is still a billion. That's still a ton. I mean, that's
yeah,
still several tons.
yeah,
So yeah, we can wrap our head around a small number, but that small number, that percentage, well, it's only 0.1% that differentiates us. Yeah, but that 0.1% is gigantic. It could
yeah.
go in any direction.
I
So,
had a person, I had a person um from one of my videos.
mhm,
Well, so one person, not the one that I'm about to say, but one person, a lady,
mhm,
um and the video is not meant to, it's like saying this is what this is what the current thing, and I linked it to the studies and to this, and this is what the current thing is. People can reject it, I mean, it's fine. I'm not, I'm not, my preference, I'm studying this study. Well, this
mhm,
lady says, there we go again, always picking on Europeans. Because here's the problem, that because people operate, I understand what she's coming from, because
mhm.
the thing is, oh, they're trying to ruin us, the Europeans, by integrating that we're now all connected when we're something special and different and this and that. And
Yeah.
so I understand, I understand, and it's been it's been the understanding for a long time. But is that the? I don't know that that's the way. So I look. I mean, the lady's saying that to me. In reality, I'm likely, I don't know this for a fact, I'm probably more European than her,
Yeah.
and recent, and
What?
recent. Like I can throw a rock and hit
Mhm,
Europe on all sides. But
mhm.
but but I mean,
I think it's funny to me in that she would say that, oh, here we go again, always against
picking
the
on,
European.
yeah,
And who is the first people Europe wants to blame for everything?
the Americans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like pot, meet kettle, kettle, meet pot.
Well,
How
anyway,
about we
so,
just drop that line of thought and move on with our days?
well, no, so yeah, so but there's a lot, so there's more people on Earth with different ideas than one
Sure,
could actually. Um,
sure.
uh, she doesn't know my intentions, so
Mhm.
she may very well be thinking, well, and she doesn't know the information.
That's because people don't read the comments or the people don't read the description of the video.
Yeah, or the actual study of what it is, but
Mhm.
because it's not an against or that my preference personally, to be honest, well, yeah, my preference is European leaning in a broad sense, but not
Mhm.
exclusive. My preference is for people that I like,
Mhm.
regardless of whatever. But the threat concerning that topic
Mhm.
is due to proximity. Let us not approach
Mhm.
the African continent. Let's not, because that's, and so they these people can still keep that feeling. I
Mhm.
think I don't think it's intelligent and ethical and correct, but I understand it, because nobody,
Mhm.
if you grew up in a thinking in a certain way, but they could still keep their point of view roughly,
Mhm.
because you're talking about events that happened across time in the past.
Yeah.
Any serious,
Mhm.
when mankind split, let's say,
Mhm.
but people have been mating between each other since then, so it's not that distant. It could
Yeah.
be right around the block, and you don't even know
And
it. So it's
and
not.
you don't even have to be the one, or your parents don't even have to be the one. I mean, you were surprised as heck to find out about your Canary Island ancestry.
No,
Weren't you surprised to find out
no, I've
about
always
Canary Island?
known. No, I've
Oh,
always
you
known.
always knew? Okay. Well, there were a couple of surprises that you came, and I thought it was Canary Islands
My
was one of them.
my great grandparents were both Canary Islanders. My
Yeah,
grandmother brought me up,
but
and
my
she
point
told me
was
story like yeah.
my
No, I
point
know.
was
I've known
you
my
got some.
history.
Okay, but my point was that when you first got that DNA analysis done, you had a couple of surprises. Like, where the heck did that come from?
Yeah, I
And I thought
didn't know.
Canary Islands was one of them.
No, what surprised me was the amount of Portuguese that I had at the
That's the
time,
one.
and the amount of French, and I didn't know the history. Like I didn't know that Portuguese was included in the story of Canary Islands, and my
Right.
grandmother never told me about Portuguese.
That's where it came from. That's where I got confused about the Canary Islands. Okay.
Yeah, so we didn't know Portuguese figured into it
Hmm.
because we hadn't. So because of my ignorance of not knowing,
Hmm.
but my reaction when I saw it, my reaction wasn't like it
No,
was like
no.
it was like what the hell, but it
Yeah.
wasn't like, oh well, this can't be, screw that, no no
Hmm.
no. But there's people that
Yeah.
react that way when they get their results
Hmm.
because um cultural norms that we've
Okay.
been taught, and what your pleasure is, what your preference is. If your
Hmm.
preference due to the informed and your ignorance on what history,
And,
I was ignorant,
and
and I've been on the process of informing myself. That's all I've
and
been doing.
and I think that's what most of it is ignorance, because they don't realize the history. They don't realize that everybody is imported. You know,
What do you mean?
they don't realize the history of the DNA crossing and this, that, and the other, and how it mixes over the eons all the way back.
Yeah,
So you end up with this, oh well, I'm Scottish, and nobody was more surprised than I am to find out that I have a direct DNA lineage from somebody who came from Belgium, for crying out loud. It
yeah,
wasn't called Belgium at the time, but that's what it is now. And it's like, what? Where'd that come from? I didn't
yeah.
expect to see that coming.
Well,
But it
yeah.
was my ignorance, because I couldn't go back far enough on my own. It took DNA tests to make that link.
Well, if you have and another thing, so another thing is, like, there was this one lady um in a group where she said, "Oh, go ahead
I'm
before I."
sorry.
No, no, go ahead.
Jim Dockerel popped up with the surprise was the amount of lizard DNA. Why do you think we go on about the lizard people, Jim?
So there was this lady in a group, and she said, "Oh, well, I have X amount of Native American, uh, but do you think it's enough for me to claim it, or would I be appropriating the culture?" So I was
Oh,
scrolling, and I stopped at that and read that, and so it's like, where do you begin?
run, don't walk.
If you're so if you're like a percentage in terms of the estimate, it's an estimate, and they're saying, well, this percent is Native American Indian, but is it enough for me to take on that identity? How can you think like that? You are what you're
Yeah, you are what you are,
you grew
exactly.
up, you have your environment stuff. um you may have ancestry that goes back to a certain place, but to think of the world in terms of like that, and are you appropriating and you're not appropriating in this, and I don't know. I found it cringy when I read it, but
Yeah.
whatever humans have in their brain is whatever humans have in their brain. But anyways, what I wanted to say is that if you have um like your grandparents and your great grandparents and your great great grandparents, and they're all from England,
Mhm.
and you could trace them all, grandparents, great
Mhm.
grandparents, great great grandparents, and like you could trace all those lines, and they're like from England.
Uh-huh.
Um, it is true that some of those maybe have more ancestry from one thing or the other that may branch out and but you're kind of like British,
Mhm. Sure.
but eventually going back, and what British means is is Normans, is
Hmm.
is the actual native British people that lived there prior to ever. It means, Vikings coming in. It means other things too. And
Hmm.
so, but people, you know, people are like that,
Yeah.
because it's not.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
that's how people are.
Robin makes a good point. People claim it all the time here, even if there's just a slight percentage. Um, Talking about the Native American
Yeah.
thing, um, we had a friend down in Nevada who was Navajo. Ed was his first name. Good guy, fun guy. He was an absolute nut, but a real fun guy. And he liked to say there are currently about 500,000 Native Americans in the US, but there are about 10 million Cherokees because that's the only name people can remember.
There's something cool
Okay, my
about it.
mistake. He wasn't Navajo. He was Apache. Ed was Apache. My mistake. But he said there's only like 600,000 Native Americans, but there are like 10 million Cherokees.
There's something culturally cool about that.
Mm-hmm. There is.
Just in popular culture, cool
Mm-hmm.
to be able to say, well, I'm X amount, even before, um, even before DNA. If you remember back, people would
Mm-hmm.
say, "Oh well, I have X amount," and there's something culturally cool because it is an anchor in a sense, and there's a cultural this and that. I don't know that
But
it's something that one could say, well, do I have enough, or
I
am I
think,
culturally am I? Do you think it's enough for me to outwardly, or am I pro? I think that idea, if you feel it, you feel it, and whatever. Now there, it's a different thing where like that one lady that I don't know if you remember that she covered herself in like sun tan
yes,
or
I
sun
do.
tanning, and she frizzed up her. Do you remember her?
Yes, I can't remember her name, but she passed herself off as African American for many
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, and but you know what, dude? If she feels
I'm
it, I mean, but I don't know.
I figure it this way: people, we in the U.S. and folks in Canada and folks, in Mexico or anywhere around the world, we need to, and not everybody does it, but because Brits are very good at it. The French are very good at it. Germans are very good at it. Spanish are very good at it. In Mexico, they're very good at it. And that is pride in your nationality and in your culture.
Yeah.
And I see Canadians and Americans specifically kind of denying that there is a Canadian culture and there is an American culture. And not as much in Canada, but definitely here, almost kind of like this. I won't say pathological, but it may become pathological for some people. Almost this need to be a part of another culture besides what we are. You know,
Is it?
I see that in a lot of people.
Is
There's,
that new
and I
or
don't think it's new. Maybe it's easier to see now because you see it all with social media and what have you. Nobody keeps secrets anymore. You know, um, but it's almost this thing like to where having an identity with a culture other than American. Like I said, it's less so in Canada, but I do see it a little bit there. It's cool. It's hip, you know. So and so you can say, oh yeah, I'm part Native American, or oh yeah,
yeah.
I'm I mean, oh yeah, I'm Italian, or oh yeah, I'm Lithuanian, whatever. It doesn't matter. But it's almost like it's cool to be something other than American or Canadian. And like I said, I don't see it as much in Canada, but I do see a little bit of it there. And
You
I
do
guess it's
have
regional too.
you do so we do have a situation. I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I guess going into in my thoughts, we do have a situation where we have old, what let's call it for the sake of it,
Mm-hmm.
old school, long standing,
Mm-hmm.
generational Americans
Mm-hmm.
that may or may not know the complexity of their history, and
Mm-hmm.
so they're simply, I mean, I've seen videos where they say, and where do you, and so, I'm just American, I'm just, they'll even say, I'm just a white American.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have any context to, is it any type of French origin, or is it any type of, British origin? Is it a mix of the two? Is there a third thing? They don't know any of that. Because they're truly, after how long? So
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm saying, after how long? So if you just like, I just popped up, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
I'm a first generation American. I
Right.
I know where my ancestors came from because it's my mom and my dad, my grandparents, and their.
Right.
So I know where everybody, and I know that I was born here just now,
And it's a shorter trip for you.
and it's a shorter trip. Yeah. Um. So I was born just here just now. So I don't have this long window
Mm-hmm.
to and look back within the confines of the country to say, oh wait, what? How the hell? At what point, after generations, you just simply are of
Yeah.
that place. I
Yeah.
mean, you are of that place the moment. Like I don't, like I could be talking to somebody that's related to George Washington,
Mm-hmm.
and in my mind, I don't look at them any more or less American than I, at
Mm-hmm.
all. It doesn't even cross my. I look at the just completely. I have
Right.
no. So on terms of like some sort of hierarchical sort of thing, due to they've been here for such a long time, and I was just born here. The moment you're born and that little tree flowers on American soil, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
well, you just feel it.
Yeah.
You're just simply
Yeah.
that. But at genealogically and memory wise,
Mm-hmm.
these people have been here for a long, 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 long time.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there's that to consider too.
Right. And it also depends on the culture that you were raised in. For instance, our mutual friend Doc descended
Jim
from no, Doc, Hildebrand
Hildebrandt.
descended from people who migrated from Italy. He was raised in that culture. Okay. I was raised in, you said that some people identify I'm just a white American.
Yeah,
That's the culture I was raised in.
yeah,
Where do you want to go and how far back do you want to go? On one side of the family, they can go back to England, then Scotland, then, as it turns out, where Belgium is now. On the other side of the family, you have Texas, then you have Louisiana, then there's a split, mainly from Ireland, but my great 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 grandmother on my mother's side was Lakota. So there's that Native American thing in there,
yeah.
but I'm still just a white American,
Right. So,
because that's the culture that I was raised in.
well, at a certain, like that, exactly. So at a certain point,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like, and you have gone back and you have traced,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
you've gathered up all that, and your father was doing, and so
Yeah.
there's, you have a tradition of gathering, but
Well,
your journey within the
mm-hmm.
confines of this land,
Well, sure.
um, going back genealogically, is a very long history within it.
It
So
is.
at what point, like I was saying, and you just mentioned it as much, you know, do you say, well, I'm this, that, in order to fulfill the.
Yeah.
At some point you just say, well, I'm a white American.
Yeah. And
Um,
you were talking about your first immigration, first
I'm on
generation.
my third immigration tonight.
Yeah. You're a first, and remember, saying the wrong word is my thing. You're a first generation American.
Yeah,
Just counting back now, I'm a ninth generation American. So I think I'm well beyond that point to where I say, yeah, I'm just a white American.
yeah. Now,
Now,
so
having said that, being born and raised here in mainly in Oregon, a little about 10 years in California, mom was from Texas. Her mom was from Texas. Their mom and dad was from Louisiana. How far back do you want to go? So, because there is
right,
a different culture in Louisiana than there is in Texas, than there is in Oregon. So,
yeah. Well, so to give the other side of that coin now,
mhm,
um, in terms of this, then you have what we let's call the Ellis Island effect.
mhm,
Like, so you have that one example, which you're included in, where you can't ring up the phone and reach out to Europe right now and talk to your relatives necessarily.
no,
Okay, but there's countless Americans, um, from all parts of Europe that have been American perhaps since the Ellis Islands days, which is a turn of the century event where those people still have, even though it's been 100 and some odd years,
mhm,
roughly, whatever the case, where those people still have um,
living relatives. Yeah.
living relatives and have contact to Europe. So you have that influx into the country where there's Americans that will say, well, we're Greek or we're that. So in the mix of what America is, you have all sorts of that as well.
Mhm.
And so you have a recent memory of your European ancestors, let's say, but you're at the same time been here 2 or 3 generations at best,
Mhm.
or one or two. I'm pretty much on the extreme end of that, where I'm the first. Well, actually, the extreme end would be someone that came here and became an American. So
Mhm.
that would be like the birth of someone that's coming from another country and becomes by their choice American. Let's say. So that would be but I'm right there right
Yeah.
next to them because I was born here from people that did that.
Mhm.
Um, so there's that, all that, and then you had mentioned Mexico and stuff. So Mexico, you're talking about 400 or 500 years of people that originally came there from Spain and
Mhm.
other parts, a lot of other parts. But after 400 or 500 years, we're not even talking about past 200 and something, 250, 60 years of
Mhm.
American history. We're talking about 500 plus years. That's almost half a millennia of people that came from Europe that came in and joined with the people in the country, and their memory. I mean, they are Mexican.
Right. And that's what I mean. You see a huge amount of pride in culture and nationality there. They are very good at showing pride in who they are.
Yeah,
You know, they are as distinct from the people of Spain as I am because they're not similar at all. They share a few basic similarities, but that's about it. And I'm
yeah,
talking in their culture. I'm not talking about anything else,
yeah,
just in their culture.
yeah,
But it's as different from the culture in Brazil as it is from the culture in Tokyo.
yeah,
So they are very good at it. The British are very good at their pride in their nationalism and their pride in their culture. The Scottish are good at it. The Irish are good at it. The Americans, I think it's cool to be a part of something other than American. I do see that quite a bit. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that the overwhelming majority of them are proud to be American, and they do take some pride in
No,
that,
but they like that extra little
but
thing.
they also like that extra little thing,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Well, but at the same time, I don't know. There's a lot of cultural things that affect and influence, but there are little nuggets like because I always remembered
Hmm.
like the dream catchers as something. I mean, some people even tattooed dream catchers on.
Yeah.
Um, I remember that because it really um, it's just a cultural. I mean, who doesn't like
Hmm.
that notion of America also has a lot of stories. You
Yeah.
know, it's not just Europe, but here there's a lot of stories, and I guess it's the theme because we are kind of like a situation where it's really a coming together of people from origins past from so
Yeah.
many different places. So there's a constant this and that,
Hmm.
right? There's a constant this and that. So it's cool, but things like cultural appropriation, this and that, I don't know. I don't think that that's a thing.
I don't
You
know.
know,
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it all comes back down to me when I hear things like that about, oh, that's cultural appropriation. I just want to hang my head because, on the one hand, I can understand somebody getting upset. I really can. I can understand someone, this is 2023. There is no excuse for blackface in anything. None. There's no excuse for it. I don't care. It's unacceptable. And I don't think very many rational people would sit there and try to make the case for it.
yeah.
But
Well, I don't think it's a
it,
decent thing to do,
no,
but
I don't.
there's a lot of not decent things that people do anyhow.
Understood. But I think that that's one of those things that can we just stop it? Can we just put the discussion off to the side? We shouldn't even be having to have that discussion anymore. This is this is 2023, not 1923. You
Yeah,
know, I
yeah.
think we're better than that as a people, as a civilization. I think we're better than that. You know.
I don't. I don't know. Well, first of all, I agree with you. So it's not like so, but
Mhm.
just thinking, I don't like. I understand the sentiment. I agree with the sentiment. So that
Mhm.
there's that. Like I agree. Period. But when I think of the request that you're making, I'm sure that a good portion of people would say yeah, and they're going to agree to it, and they'll accept that and follow that that idea. But I can't help but think with the request that you made that X amount of people are going to be saying, you know,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of thing,
Well,
and
yeah. What rational person is going to go? No, wait. Let's examine this because there could be a case, and it's BS. I mean, there's so much that can just go away, and let's retire it. It's tired. It happened in the past. Let's leave it alone. Steve put up at a very, very good point because I am walking on dangerous ground here. So the views expressed in this podcast do not reflect the views of our sponsors. So there. It's
well,
100% my opinion, and I'm willing to go down in flames for it. I think some of this stuff needs to just go away. We are
yeah,
better than that.
okay, so yeah, so like I said, I know that in this world there's all sorts of types, and you know the story.
Mhm.
The sentiment is well received. That's my opinion. And how is I can never get through this. But those are not the opinions of our sponsors and so on and so on. It's me talking here.
Mhm.
I you know how people are very much individuals acting according to their understanding or emotions or a combination of those, and people will sometimes be they will contradict the best case scenarios or best motivate best actions that they could take, they will go the opposite route just to spite their themselves and
Yeah.
others, because humans are complicated. So the sentiment is but I think that it's a tall order
But I think
to
okay, and it may be, and I'll admit it may be a tall order. But that's still my opinion. I think a lot of this can just go away. I mean, there are a lot of things now on the cultural appropriation front. That doesn't mean that you and I can't make burritos, or that you and I can't make tacos. That doesn't mean that we can't run a food truck.
yeah,
But
but you have
but
to have a disclaimer.
but no. But if I go sitting out in front of my house in a serape with a sombrero on, I deserve every ass whooping I get.
I don't if
You know,
you're
putting
if
on a fake accent and stuff like that, I just kind of deserve every ass whooping I get. You know,
I don't think so. Well, I don't think so, because there's two choices. Either you really like it, because there's that.
oh,
I don't know. I've seen movies. Or okay, I'll give you a great example. This is a slight, but I'll just say I really like the movies with Clint Eastwood in them, especially the
mm-hmm,
westerns. I don't know why. I like the idea of maybe it was because my mom
mm-hmm,
put a poster of the marble when I was growing up. And I would look at the marble, and he had the hat, and he was
mm-hmm.
sitting there and stuff, and the horse. But I grew up watching these westerns and all this stuff. So what can I tell you? It's so I've often thought, man, that'd be cool, the hat and stuff. What if someone, besides just thinking it's cool like me, like, man, that hat, with the poncho, in my mind, if everybody else was wearing one, see, here's the thing, I wouldn't want to be embarrassed, but I'd be like donning it. Let's do it, man. But wait, so let me just say, but who's to say someone that doesn't have shame is willing to don the poncho and hat because they like it? It may seem out of place for, you know what I'm saying, right? So
Yeah,
it's
I
like
do. There's some incongruity, and there is something to be said for when in Rome. I do agree with that. However, I'll give you an example. I know a real estate agent here in the valley, whitest guy you'll ever meet next to me. I mean, we could be twin brothers just about. He is absolutely in love with African art, and he has a lot of pieces in his house. But that you don't see him wearing a dashiki. You don't see him wearing the big necklace. You don't see him with the hat. It's one thing to love the culture and celebrate the culture and even collect pieces from the culture. But I think if you're not of that culture, leave it alone.
that's your preference.
That's it. That is just my opinion. That's not saying he can't collect African art. It's his aesthetic. It's his thing. More power to him. And he has the right to have
American,
everything that he has collected over the years.
yeah.
But should he ever say, Mark, would it be wrong of me to go outside in a dashiki? Probably. It would probably be wrong.
So two things. So my position is like whatever. If I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's like if he whatever. It's like it doesn't. There's two. So on a cultural, on a dignity level, there's two
Yes.
aspects. If you're wearing that, well, number one, I think it's ridiculous, but that's my personal. But if you're wearing that because you like it and you just freaking identify, I mean, like you really freaking like it, and be damned with what people think. That's kind of an honor to, on, and you have no, and you have no, and you
If
have,
you're
you
willing
have
to
no,
fight for it,
and you have no shame. You have no shame. But there's people like that. I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you an example. People like there's guys that like to wear, and gals, white people that like to wear dreadlocks,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like the type of bohemian slash skater slash surfer slash that type of person who knows what their lifestyle is, and they like that. They like it. Well, I've seen videos where people get attacked because the dude has the little what do you call it, the dreadlocks,
Mhm.
and like a lady will come up, you're appropriating, or this is, I've seen videos like that. It's like, you know, I, it's
What
like, if the person wants to wear, now on the opposite side, if a person is doing that because
to
they're
be
engaged in a,
disrespectful? Yeah.
right, they're engaged in a long and tedious
Mhm.
journey of insulting the
Right.
community in order to
I
grow their hair out and do that. If you're doing that, I mean, it's like, ugh,
I can
you know,
see that. I can see that. Linda brings up a good point, in talking about, for instance, just as an example, one the best bass drummer in a bagpipe band I ever saw was a huge black guy, and that's true. He was very, very good. But they also, to be in a band, you have to be in what they call Highland attire, which is a kilt, uh, tuxedo shirt, and at the least a vest, sometimes a Prince Charlie. So you have to be in the pipe band uniform. That is, to me, not cultural appropriation because it's a specific thing.
what do you
You
mean?
know,
Explain it
it's
again.
a specific event. To perform with a bag, to compete in a bagpipe band, you have to be in what they call Highland attire.
Oh, so if the African guy
So
was wearing it
So
in
he
that
wore
situation,
he wore the kilt, he wore the tuxedo shirt, he wore the vest, and
mhm.
he was in the band uniform.
Well,
Somebody could ask, now isn't that cultural appropriation? No.
I'd have the
That
answer.
that is the uniform required to compete at that event.
Yeah, and I'd also have the answer. I see no problem
Mhm.
with
Me either.
now maybe brace yourself, maybe not, but I'm being very frank here. I see no problem with an African descent dude, wearing um, all the regalia involved
Me either.
in a Scottish, ritual thing, and any to any degree. And why? Because in reality, at least in America, specifically in America, African American people are up to 20 to 25%, literally from the British Isles, many of which from Scotland. So their inheritance, even though we may not um,
Lem-
culturally understand this,
Well, and that's
but
what I'm talking about, 100% cultural.
no, but listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying that indeed these people are the descendants. Now, it may be dubious in the manner that occurred, but these people indeed are the inheritors by blood of
Mhm.
that history.
Well,
Undeniable.
I'm not even going that far. I'm not even going that far. And again, I'm not talking about DNA or ancestry or anything like that. I'm talking about cultural. You know,
Yeah,
um,
but I just
I
wanted
have
to add
I
that.
have ancestry back into Louisiana, but I don't claim to be any part of Cajun. I have ancestry that's Lakota, but I don't claim to be Native American either because I don't see myself that way because I don't know enough about either of those cultures to even claim it. You know. So, and it's a shame. I should learn more about my grandmother's uh, Lakota roots. I just don't know it.
The reason that I brought it up and I made it a statement, and I
Mhm.
did uh, preamble
Well,
it saying that it was it's slightly, I mean, I don't know either way, but I could envision that it would be, is that um, the idea of African American is a monolithic idea, but it's not true in terms of even something such as what I just mentioned. So the African American, in a general sense, on average, has, regardless of how that may or may not have happened, has upwards of 20 to 25%, and some even way more, some less, of course, but on average, 20 to 25% DNA coming from Europe, and in particular, a lot of it from the British Isles. So they, they're more dynamic than, let's say, just a group and a specific thing. It's the same thing with, like, let's say, any other group, you know. So I just wanted to emphasize that idea, because that idea is also it's one of the hardest things, like to think that it's just a group is not true. They're not just a group. You can group them, but it's not true. They're actually more dynamic than that. I know it's a tough one. I know,
Well,
but
I
there's
wasn't even going in that direction.
no,
Is
but
all I was
I
getting at.
wanted to, explain that concept as well. Um,
Well,
and itself, and also they may or may not, depending on if they're from one place or the other, understand that or not understand that, or maybe they know more than I would or less. But the point is that they're more dynamic. Like, okay, so like white people, like we mentioned, at what point after a certain amount of time we mentioned, but white people includes many people from
yeah.
different parts of the world,
Oh, yeah.
in Europe, that aren't just one uh, uh, like one
Yeah.
origin.
Monolithic. Right. I mean, you got
Yeah.
Scandinavian, you got French, you've got German. I mean, you've got
Yes. Oh,
Russian, Estonian. I mean, how far do you
so
want to go?
exactly. So the same applies for African
Hmm.
completely.
Oh, yeah.
But the problem is cultural norms have brought us to believe, and it's just everybody. It's the cultural understanding, but they're actually more dynamic than just, let's say, one thing.
Hmm.
Um, but culturally,
Yeah. That's what I was referring to was
yeah,
culturally. If and a lot of it depends on your intent with it. If you just like it, that's one thing, but you'd better be ready to defend it should someone else say something. That's all I was getting at. It's great. You can love it all you want to. Just you may be put in a position to where you have to defend it. If you don't mean disrespect, and I think that's where there's a lot of issue today is that every perceived slight is seen as a sign of disrespect. If I have a tattoo of something on this arm, it means an insult. But if it's on this arm, it means, let's get
something
married
good.
and have 16 babies. I mean, you know, if somebody just doesn't know, they just don't know. Personally, I think do your research, figure it out before you make that kind of a commitment. And if it's something where you're not really sure, maybe it's not a good idea to do it. But some things are kind of flagrant and they could just kind of go away. You know?
Yeah, yeah. No, so that's a personal taste thing. I think that your understanding of it, I agree with, because I mean, even though I agree with your understanding of it, there's a threshold that we share where I think it has to do with certain manners, but that
Yeah,
comes from a certain era in time where other
yeah.
people may not necessarily today share certain boundaries. I don't know.
Well,
Maybe there's always been that, but it's kind of like
it's quite
Hawaiian. It's kind
it's
of like Hawaiian shirts.
hmm
Um, I mean, that's a bad example, but like when you go to Hawaii, you know how, there's the Hawaiian and you would know
hmm
more about this. That's a very Hawaiian thing.
right.
I don't think that people go to Hawaii and wear that,
Sure they do.
or buy that. No, but let me finish the sentence so you understand what I'm saying. Um, let's see if your answer would be the same if I finish the sentence. Let's see.
Okay. Go
If
ahead.
they let's see if it's the same. If they go to, it's almost like the Jeopardy. If they go to Hawaii and wear that in order to insult the culture and this and that, I think they would. I mean, they might, but you'll tell me. I think they go there and do it because it's part of the experience, and some people bring it back and they like it, and who's to say is what I'm getting
Well,
at. You know?
you have no way of knowing this, having never been there, but there is at least there was when we were there. There is a thing called Aloha Friday. And that is on every Friday, and just about everywhere people wear the aloha attire. They wear the aloha shirt, and it's a thing. Companies do it, businesses do it.
Yeah.
You'll walk into an electronics store and everybody there has their name tag, but they're wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Now, it may be a special print for that company,
but it's still the
but
theme.
it's still the theme. It's Aloha Friday.
Yeah.
And the colors come out, and everybody is walking around. I mean, cab drivers are wearing it. The guy at McDonald's in the drive-through was wearing it. He's got his McDonald's name tag and his little hat,
Hmm.
but he's still in a Hawaiian shirt. So you can't see that much of it and not go, you know what, this is actually kind of cool.
Yeah. That
And
is the idea of this social. Okay, look, we've gone into this social appropriation situation, but
mhm,
um, one of the problems I see with thinking in those terms is the reverse assumption that by donning something because of pleasure or something negative,
mhm,
whatever, but acquiring something and wearing it for whatever reason. Usually, most of the time, it's usually for because
right.
one enjoys it. But it's the reverse idea that from these people, at least I'm assuming, where it's like whatever that culture is that they're donning, that original culture, that culture is so feeble that you're
Yeah.
robbing its essence, because and really what you're doing is you're multiplying its coolness
Uh-huh.
or its awareness, um because now you're sharing I just I don't see it as a, in fact, well, I don't see it as a problem.
And that's why I think without knowing it, we're reinforcing one another's point.
Well, yeah, we
That's
might be in
why,
danger of that.
and that's why I hear. That's why when I hear that, my first reaction is to slump my shoulders, drop my head, and go, "Oh no," because so much of it, so much of perceived appropriation,
Is bullcrap.
just isn't. It
Yeah.
just isn't. You know, me wearing a white t-shirt today and a black t-shirt tomorrow has no significance. It's just what I wanted to wear today. There's no appropriation of anything involved in anything. But depending upon where you at, I'll give you for instance, we lived in Savannah, Georgia. My daughter was forbidden from wearing a black t-shirt on certain days of the week because it was quote unquote gang related.
Yeah. No.
And her wearing a black t-shirt just wasn't.
Well, it's kind of like
You
what
know,
Jim. Yeah, I'm gonna put this up because this is kind of the idea.
yeah,
It's like assuming someone wearing jeans is a working man anymore.
yeah,
So, but there's also a few things. So originally, obviously, farmers and such, and they needed something
hmm,
rugged and this, but now everybody does it, right? Like everybody wears. I mean, who
hmm,
doesn't wear jeans? And so it's become a thing.
yeah.
Um, but like I don't know. I just it's so obvious.
Now,
It makes perfect sense, to understand that concept. But people aren't on the same. A lot of people. I just let me just say this, and I'll be done with this part of it. If this appropriation idea, which we're picking on right now, because it's kind of dumb, but um, the idea is dumb, the appropriation concept and stuff. But we're picking on it right now. Just so if tomorrow or if within the next 5-10 years, um, like let's say more people are on to that appropriation concept, like in the positive, like they're like, man, yeah, the appropriation, and they keep reinforcing the idea of in 100 200 years from now, appropriation will be like the main thing on the menu, and like everybody will have to be blocked up. If you
yeah,
don't allow for cultures to cross pollinate in their food and in their this and
hmm,
that,
yeah,
then you're I
yes,
guess what
you're
I'm getting at is this: you're actually being a racist.
yes,
You don't allow people to.
and that's a good point. You are of Cuban ancestry, so therefore you can only eat Cuban food. If you
Yeah.
come out and get a hamburger, that's cultural appropriation. I'll show
Cubans
you
have
how.
Cubans have hamburgers.
I'll show you how silly this is. I have Scottish ancestry. I have a kilt. All you women wearing skirts, that's cultural appropriation. You can't wear skirts anymore.
I
You
just want
can
to say
wear a dress, but you cannot wear a skirt because that's cultural
I
appropriation.
I get the point. I just want to reemphasize because you're not taking my freaking hamburger. that little now you can't eat hamburger anymore. That hit home. That was
Well, okay, I won't say you, but you can't go to McDonald's.
Look. That was like to say you can't say. See now that I will. You can't say okay McDonald's. I can't.
You can't go to McDonald's anymore. No.
Okay, well I like their fish fillet.
Sorry, you can't do it. You can only eat Cuban food.
No, but I'm saying Cubans have this burger, but it's not quite the same. We'll talk about it another time. There's a different method in the burger. It's not the same. I've never liked. They're good if they're made right. They're freaking awesome. But there's a difference. The American burger has the taste that we're all familiar with. The Cuban burger has special ingredients within the forming of the, and it's traditional, but it has a slight Caribbean taste to it. It's not the same as like just that meat.
And I'm sure everybody has their own twist on it. I'm certain that they have.
Yeah.
I mean, Americans can't. Well, and that's where the word hamburger came from Hamburg, Germany. So, I mean, there are other cultures that have been chopping up beef into small pieces and forming a patty out of it and cooking it. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
So,
does that mean I can't go for a shawarma? No.
Shawarma.
When
my friend opened his restaurant. That's right. You're Canadian. You can only go for poutine and bacon. Back bacon. It's got to be back bacon.
There was a Middle Eastern and Greek restaurant here, Mark, for a little while.
Oh, I will tear up some Greek food. My God.
Dude, they had... So it was Greek / Middle Eastern. And they had these soups or stews, and they had these... And they had the falafel. They had everything that you... And like all that. Dude, I said, let me try something different. And I started with that. And I go there like once a week and stuff. And it was so good. And they closed up because I guess there wasn't enough interest. But in a certain time range, back a few years, it was all the rage for me.
Oh yeah.
So if you restrict all these things, or are shocked and offended by this or that, it's because you think that other culture is being robbed and feeble and this and that, and that thought is stupid and kind of reverse bigoted.
And that's my main problem with it, is because so many of these claims are made by people who aren't even of that culture.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, look, they don't need you. If they're offended, they'll say something. They don't need you to come in on your white stallion and save the day. Stop it.
Yeah. And may I say, this conversation we're having, it just for future reference, it's because it's the order of the day. As far as like, if we were 20 years ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation because it didn't exist. The theme of like appropriation.
Well, it existed, but it was on a one-on-one level. It was on a personal level. If some guy put colored stripes on his face and wore a feathered headdress and everything and went out for Halloween, it was talked about. It was discussed. And he was questioned on it right there. It's like, what are you doing? That's not a costume. You know?
Really?
Believe me. Oh, yeah. Growing up in the Bay Area, I saw it. I saw it a couple of times with various different costumes. You know, you dress up like a cowboy, that's fine. Great. You dress up like a pirate, that's fine. That's great. You dress up like Aunt Jemima, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for trouble.
Okay, so I just want to say this one thing. One ingredient missing, at least from my time growing up in Miami, being born and grown up here, maybe my parents' time was different of what they observed, perhaps, especially in the early days. But the sort of like the cosmopolitan concept of it was such that, and the influx of people from the Cuban exile and all that, these weren't standard obsessions.
Hmm.
So the American problem with that kind of thing,
Hmm.
even though Miami and South Florida is obviously within the structure of the United States, due to the population, um, they don't have the same reference points
Hmm.
as the rest of the United States. They weren't involved
Right.
in growing up in the historical, nor their ancestors and ancestors. Many were, but what I'm
Hmm.
saying is that that shared experience that the rest of the country has to one degree or the other
Hmm.
was not necessarily part of the broader group
Right.
that I
Understood.
belong to. So
Yeah.
reference points on those tensions
Yeah.
weren't at the same. Now we were informed about it, but we didn't internalize it.
And yeah, and it was my generation that kind of fought that battle because, like in the 50s, it was cool. It was cool. But on the quote unquote war paint and the headdress and go for it in the 50s. It was in the 60s that it was like, no, dude, that's not cool. That's an insult. What are you doing? And that's where I came up with the serape and the sombrero thing. No, dude, that's not cool. What are you doing? You know, it was a change. Um, we kind of, my generation was kind of hopeful that a lot of this stuff would just kind of go away. And it's like, look, let's just be nice to one another. It didn't turn out that way. We went from, you know, our melting pot has never been creamy. It would always a little bit chunky. Well, we thought we were kind of smoothing some things out, but all of a sudden we went super chunk. And I don't, you know, I don't know why. But I think in this day and age, I mean, this is not the Stone Age. This is not the 19th century.
It's practically the night in a certain way. It
You
is.
know, a lot of this stuff could really go away. But there's been a cultural shift to where we can't even have this discussion anymore. You and I, one on one, as people, can have this discussion. But I mean, as a nation, as a civilization, as we can't have that discussion because somebody is going to start pointing a finger. Well, you did this. Well, no, I didn't. I was not there. Neither were you. You know what I mean? We have to be enemies. And that just needs to go away.
There's a paper that somebody studied for in my opinion for their purposes, where they studied the Cuban community and the exile community
Mhm.
and the idea of whiteness within the Cuban community and their concepts and within the context of the greater United States. And in the paper, they went through a lot of different things and stuff. And the guy went to Cuba itself and found, um, from his American point of view, African American point of view, significant signs of racial, things that were racial, concerning Africans and in Cuba and
Mhm.
the whites of Cuba, and then the concept of within the United States and like Hispanics and all that. He did a whole study
Mhm.
because why are Cubans treated different or have been treated different? Although in certain occasions this might differ, but in the grand scheme of things, they've been treated different. And so he was trying to make a few assertions, but he did, and it's in depth, and that was his thing. Um, but what was interesting in it when I read it is that he said a part when he talked to somebody where when a Cuban is in a situation, an exile, in his reckoning, they can easily incorporate like with other groups, um, and be less white, let's say, but yet still claim they're like they they can have their cake and eat it too, sort of thing. He was trying to explain, um, when it comes to the plight of other people and this and that. And it's an in-depth thing, but the point is this: that due to the idea of Hispanics and the idea of, well, is that white? Is that not white? What is white? And all these questions that are never resolved for the average person in their mind.
Mhm.
It means one thing, it means another. Is it, what is it? Is this European? It's not European. All these ideas. It's lack of understanding and ignorance on historical levels. But the idea that Hispanic can teeter totter. So I could. So
Yeah.
in a way,
Mhm.
I'm quite comfortable in most situations because I can literally teeter totter because the concept. So I'm so so uh, ancestrally, I'm very much European, albeit Southern European, albeit Iberian
Mhm.
Peninsula, but it's not like you know where did I don't know where are my ancestors? No, I know. Um, but because of the variation in the United States, where they're not quite sure what the hell that is in a general sense, um, I could easily say anything to anybody with not much understanding, and they're like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." So I could downgrade my Europeanness, or I can accentuate it,
Mhm.
and it's all within the spectrum of doable,
Mhm.
depending on the situation I'm in.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
I do, and you also have the added benefit of being bilingual.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another layer you can throw into that because not only can you speak the language, you can understand the language. So if somebody is like, "Oh, look at this guy over here," you're like, "Yeah, what's the matter with this guy over here?" Then
Yeah.
it's like,
So
"Oh, wait, he understands what we're saying." Ding dong Skippy, I understand what you're saying. Now, you want to continue this conversation? Where are we going with it?
yeah. So it's an interesting thing
Mhm.
because for the Hispanic, the greater Hispanic world, as far as I know for sure when it comes to Cuba and the Caribbean
Mhm.
and other places, um, agnic, uh, anecdotal,
Anecdotally, yeah.
um, that they think of themselves as, oh, I'm Argentinian, or
Hmm.
oh, I'm Ecuadorian, or oh, I'm.
Hmm.
They're not. Oh, I'm a white guy, or oh, I'm a black guy.
Yeah, I've
They
heard that.
may they may be those things as a subcategory, but the main category is just simply I'm of
Yeah,
this country or whatnot. So
yeah,
they have that, but in the United States, that's not necessarily
yeah.
what has been the traditional thing. So people
Well,
usually say, "Oh, well, what are you exactly?" And if you do say something to the effect of anything to do with Spanish, it's not self-apparent nor even probably crossed their mind that it has anything to do at all with anything remotely close to Europe. Well,
mhm.
I don't know how who came here in the Santa Maria and the Pinta and the no, I don't know none of that. So they have no idea. So and it's due to so in that paper that African American guy was doing, and he was doing it for other reasons, it seemed.
Mhm.
But regardless, I read it. He mentioned something that I found curious. Well, yeah, it's true here in the United States. Like, I go somewhere like, let's say, somewhere in Nebraska and stuff, and I don't know. I could oh, well, where are you from? I could say basically anything. I mean, anybody could say anything, but the point is that even if you tell them the truth, they're not going to understand it.
Yeah,
They're not going to understand it. So there's that. I just found it
yeah,
interesting. Whatever.
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, there's
But you see what I'm
there's
saying, right? Like,
yes, there's so many directions that could go in. It's not even funny because it is a pretty American thing to do that, to self divide, and it just, I don't know.
yeah,
Another one of those things that make me kind of hang my head and do that.
yeah, but you're not. But the problem is that even though you're American,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
you're you,
Mhm.
and you're not responsible for your fellow
Oh
American.
no, I'm not. I'm not. I just think that we can do better.
Yeah, but
I
some people don't have some people.
Well,
It
some people don't
seems.
want to do better. Some people just don't want to do better. They want things to go back to the way they think they were 50 or 100 years ago. And it's just like, yeah, no,
No,
we're
but they
better.
probably think that. There's some people that probably think that, but there's some people that think that and really wouldn't like it because it would probably
What those again?
the
It's
thing.
all ignorance, you know.
Well, where we're at now, like we're
Mhm.
criticizing a lot of different things, but if you okay, so a lot of things that I used to say as a matter of fact, or as a one off when you're talking with friends and such,
Mhm.
that I remember quite well that I used to say
Mhm.
today would be considered blasphemy.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So even us, we've progressed in time where now could we go back to those habits? I'm sure we could, but we're not there anymore in
It
terms of
depends on
like,
our surroundings. It depends on our surrounding. Because if you surround yourself with people who think exactly the same way, it's real easy to do.
yeah, yeah,
You know.
yeah. You're right. I guess it's one of those things. It's life is a forward march, and I mean, there's always going to be weird people or people that are less than like bright in
And
terms of
less than honest, and
yeah,
less than well intentioned. I mean,
yeah.
there's prisons are full of bad people.
Before we wrap up, because we've crossed the Rubicon, I did
Oh,
want to.
about a half hour ago, yeah.
I just want to give a synopsis, a quick synopsis. This is called DNA. This is from Scientific America. DNA, the ultimate data storage solution. The double helix can archive a staggering amount of information in almost inconceivably small volume. This was published in 2021, and let me see if I can get the okay. DNA can archive a staggering amount of information. Humanity will generate an estimated 33 zettabytes of data by 2025. That's 3.3 followed by 22 zeros. DNA storage can squeeze all that information into a ping pong ball with room to spare. The 74 million bytes of information in the Library of Congress could be crammed into a DNA archive the size of a poppy seed, 6,000 times over. Split the seed in half, and you could store all of Facebook's data. Um, and so it goes into how that works. I'm not going to read, but it's basically laying out how that works. They can encode literal information into DNA. That is freaky.
Now, can you put a link to that over on our Facebook page?
Yes, I can.
Well, I don't. You don't have to do it right this second, but
Oh, okay.
that
Well,
way
I
we
was
can go ahead and
automatic.
well that way we can wrap this up as and then you can do it when we're finished.
Okay,
But
okay. I just
never
left it
mind, you
there.
already did it.
No,
I was using that as a segue to land the plane.
okay. So,
See,
well, nothing.
consider me the flight attendant pushing the cart with the drinks into the little things and saying, "Please fasten your seatbelt and return your seat to its upright
Right.
position." And Frida, come help me return this guy to his original upright position. He's had 19 bottles of Kahlua. You know,
19 bottles of beer on the wall. I want to thank you guys for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed it. We talked a little bit of this, and that. None of, and absolutely, and I guess Mark will go through it in the proper way, but absolutely none of the information discussed today, or information even conceived of that has yet not been discussed today in this episode, previous episodes, or in the episodes to come, have anything to do with our sponsors in terms of what they believe, think, or believe. So unattached. The views expressed, in other words, the views expressed in this podcast do not reflect the views of our sponsors. So we go live every Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time. And we go live here on YouTube. That's Trampled Underfoot Podcast on YouTube. You can catch us over on Facebook, Trampled Underfoot Podcast on Facebook. And we also have a website, trampledunderfootpodcast.com. You can catch our past episodes over there. And we're also sponsored by
Harneal Media, your web source If you're looking to create or increase your web presence, maybe you want to create a web store where you can sell your items or sell your services. Or maybe you want to create and sell merch. Steve can hook you up with that. Harneal Media is your one-stop website shop. There's a link in every single one of our podcast episodes. So if you are considering a website of your own, the only place to go is to harnealmedia.com. Right there in the chat and right there in the description. Click that link and tell them Mark and Eloy sent you.
That's right. Well, all right, guys. Enjoy the rest of your week. Be safe. Be happy. Do the things you love to do. We wish you the best, and we'll catch you guys next time. We're out of here. See you.
Peace.